This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Hop in the Supermobile and join us for the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, available exclusively for members of my Patreon community. It's a monthly tour across the DC universe with the signature Digging for Kryptonite style applied to your other DC favorites. Additional Patreon rewards include advanced listens, sponsorships, and more. We offer regular monthly memberships, discounted annual plans, free trials, and a la carte purchases. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato or click the link in the show notes for more. Thank you all. Before the rocket carrying Krypton's last hope, before the kindly couple, before the great metropolitan newspaper, there was the world that gave birth to the universe's greatest hero. Now, in Doomed Planet, we consider Krypton's history, legacy, and destruction, and the part of it that survived. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the second and final season of the Syfy television series Krypton is the host of the KRYPTON Report podcast, returning guest Tyler Patrick. Welcome back.
Thank you. And now you kind of get why we have Krypton in our name.
Yes. Was that actually one of the motivations? Because when did you start?
Yes.
Was it right around that time?
So when I started podcasting, and I wanted to bring this up because I think it files into it. It's like I was started podcasting just as a co-host. We were starting to review Gotham. And then there was talk about the Krypton show. Excuse me. And part of the name, we were just going to review the Krypton TV series, and then they announced the Supergirl series. So we were just going to review the two series. And then, as we know, Gotham started, Krypton kept getting delayed. And then Gotham came and ran and ended. Krypton came and went while Gotham still went in the back. So that's kind of where the name kind of started, was we were going to be reviewing that. And then we just kind of morphed the show more into what it is now. So
awesome. No, that's really cool. So yeah, the second and sadly final season of this short-lived Superman prequel, 10 episodes, just like the first season. And when last we saw our characters, just to kind of recap for our audience here, Seg had banished Brainiac to the Phantom Zone, but unfortunately Brainiac pulled Seg in with him. And as Seg departed this plane of existence, he reminded his grandfather Val-El, inspired him to once again continue to hope for a better tomorrow. And that was the last we saw of our protagonist, as Seg's son, the time-traveling General Zod, took over and made Krypton into this militaristic society, abolished the caste system that had existed with the rankless, conscripted them into military service, and stood there making this grand speech with his mother, Lyda, and another member of the Sagittarii, Dev M, by his side, as he was making this big speech. And our final shot of season 1 of Krypton was the ultimate weapon, Doomsday, trying to break free from his containment chamber. And that was where we left off. I know I haven't addressed every single character, but those were some of the broad strokes of what we saw.
I remember watching that and just being like, wow. You just be like, and being like, wow. But then at the same time, like, that makes sense. I was like, they could do this. They could pull off something with Doomsday. And I was excited. Like, because this show, like you said, it was kind of like, okay, what are they going to do? And then it was like, going to tie into Man of Steel. And I was like, okay. And then they were like, Seg's grandfather, or, Seg, I was like, but then I thought about, like, well, I got thinking about, like, in my life, like, I have a lot of traits similar to my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. And I'm like, that's kind of cool, because the idea is, what if, we don't know much about Seg. He could have been more militaristic or something. And, then Jor was more scientific, or Seg could have been more political. And then, it kind of and then that gives you kind of cows, and then they made it about grandsons and grandfathers, which I thought was a nice, just something a little bit different than being about fathers and sons. So
Absolutely. It was a whole other angle to explore. And look, we'll get into this 10 episode final season. But if the first season were Game of Thrones-esque in its political intrigue and maneuvering and whatnot, I feel like season 2 is like full on Star Wars, where we have our rebel base on the moon versus the Empire in the form of, again, Zod's militaristic society and his force, the Sagittarii. And you have to say it that way, the Sagittarii. Yes. I'm sticking to that as we make our way through here. So, look, we'll unpack it all over the course of the season. Of course, Seg makes his way back to Krypton, but not before a stop in Kolu and an interaction with Lobo, DC Comics character Lobo, who makes his live action debut here. And again, a lot of back and forth between the rebels and Zod's forces. But I gotta say, man, I'm going to plow right into, I think it's the 7th episode of the season, Zods and Monsters, because man, I really had an emotional reaction to watching the episode. And it's the scene. So there's a lot going on in this episode. It's the episode that gives us a truly heartbreaking origin for Doomsday. And I can't wait to compare notes on that. But there's this scene where Korvex, the child produced by Seg-El and Nyssa, and we'll also get back to that love triangle, because truly, I think one of the best we've seen in any of these superhero properties. But there's this scene where Seg and Nyssa and their son Korvex are together in the Fortress of Solitude. And Nyssa has this moment where she sort of wants to rename the baby. She wants to turn her back on the Vex house and all of the trouble and whatnot that it's wrought. And so she wants their child to be an El. And so for a fleeting moment, the baby is Kor-El. But then the holographic projection of Val-El, Seg's grandfather, chimes in. And he says that in Kryptonian tradition, it's customary for an El to take the first name of one of their ancestors. And Val starts to talk about his father. And he talks about how he was a humble man, and his achievements paled in comparison to some of the other Kryptonians, but that's because he put his family first. And he says he was kind-hearted, a brilliant scientist, and a wonderful father. And Seg then officially rechristens the baby as JOR-EL, and he says, "My son, years from now, when they tell the story of your life and your accomplishments, they'll be telling the story of JOR-EL." And we get a few notes of that John Williams theme. And look, man, I'm not ashamed to admit I don't subscribe to kind of outdated traditional notions of masculinity in certain respects. And man, I was in tears. I had to pause it and blow my nose and like take a second. It really got me.
It hits you harder as a dad. Like, because like I've talked about before, is like watching Superman the movie and Man of Steel after having Solomon, and then all of a sudden plugging into JOR-EL in that opening parts, and it hits you different. And the way that they describe the first JOR-EL, it kind of sounds similar to Jonathan Kent.
Yes.
You know, the kind of person that would actually end up raising Seg's grandson. So I loved it. Because, you know, they were like Korvex, and I was like, okay, I'm rolling with it. You know, this is the show. Okay, what's going on? And, you know, and then like you were talking about last time, like the battle for Superman's grandma, you know, and we're like, so Nyssa Vex is Superman's grandma. So her name technically should be Nyssa Darren Vex, but whatever, because we know how Kryptonian women are supposed to have their full father's name, but whatever, we'll let it go. And yeah, that scene, it got me because you were like, yes, finally. Like you kind of felt like, were they, but they did it. And then, yeah,
I got to tell you,
beautiful. And, yeah. And I got some questions for you later, because you guys pointed out some stuff last time that I was kind of like, I couldn't remember about the whole Zod thing. So
I have to say though, as much as it was a soaring moment when you heard those few notes of the John Williams theme and Seg reintroduces the baby as JOR-EL, but what really got me was just Val talking about his father And just kind of, because look, I mean, I've talked about this on this, we did a whole episode, right, about how, going back to Jonathan Kent, that scene from the pilot of Superman and Lois made such an impression on me when Clark is talking to Jordan and is like, look, my dad, he was on his way to church one day and he became a father in an instant and he didn't know what he was doing, but he was just there. Like, and that was all.
I quoted that today.
Yeah.
I quoted that at work today.
And that was, again, I talked about it like that in large part motivated my decision to get a different job where I could work remotely. Like, it really had a profound effect on me. And it's something that I've really carried forward in my parenting, in that it's like, I know I'm not always going to have the answers or do the right thing. As he gets older, I know there will be times we disagree, whatever, but it's like, I can be there, right? I can just be there and he'll know he always has that. And so as Val was talking about that with such pride, right? And it wasn't pride that his father accomplished this or that in the scientific field, right? He mentions the scientific mind, but it's sandwiched between he was kind-hearted, he was a wonderful father. Like, that's what made the impression on this guy. And even as I'm talking about it now, like I get choked up about it, but it was such a beautiful scene. It was the highlight of the scene. There was so much awesome stuff. Just, again, not to bury the lead once more, this second season was great. I went into this not knowing if there was going to be a little bit of a dip. A couple of people on social media were kind of warning me a little bit about season 2, so I went in a little apprehensive, but goddamn it was so good.
The tone, I think this season they knew what the show was. You guys had talked about last season, and we had talked about, you and I, over the history of just how they kind of tweaked it and changed season 1 from what the initial plan was. And this season they went in knowing this is our show, and they didn't hold back. Like, they gave us some substance, this season did you ever watch Battlestar Galactica when it was on Syfy?
No, I mean, man, I knew of it and everyone was talking about it. So I know like kind of the broad strokes, but I never watched it.
I didn't watch it until I was working at Blockbuster, and I just kind of started. But like, that show like had seasons, but then they would do these Sci-Fi Channel movies that would kind of be in between seasons or what. And I had hoped that when they canceled this, they would have given us like a Sci-Fi Channel movie that would have been like the third season, kind of summing it up, so that they didn't leave us on the cliffhanger we'll talk about.
Yes. We'll get to the ending, but yeah, it's heartbreaking that this didn't get a proper conclusion. Zach and I talked last time about how it could still have one through a connection to Superman and Lois, unlikely though that may be. And I do want to ask you about that too when we get to the end. But let's circle back to the beginning here, the beginning of the season, where specifically Seg's journey here, our protagonist. I know in our last episode, I feel like he kind of got a little bit lost in the shuffle. So there was so much going on and so many characters. But let's talk about Seg, because he starts here in the Phantom Zone, right?
Best Phantom Zone ever.
I was going to say, you and I talked, because we did an episode on that Supergirl movie, and we talked about its depiction of the Phantom Zone. And look, we've seen it in the Supergirl TV show and Smallville. Like, we've seen it in a bunch of places. But yeah, tell me what you thought about this the way it was realized here.
I loved it. Like, I remember you and I talked about it a little bit, and I was like, I couldn't fully say it because like you hadn't watched Krypton, and I didn't want to spoil anything or like say just go watch this scene because but I like it. Like, it's such more like, not a desert.
How would you describe it? How would you describe it to people who haven't seen it? And they're like, what are these guys talking about?
Like, hold on. I know the word I want to use, and I'm running slow, but like a
kaleidoscope.
Okay. Yeah, it's like an iridescent kaleidoscope of color, but like an imagery in space. Because you can see Seg seeing things and interacting, because it is outside time and space, and I think it's the best depiction of the Phantom Zone we've ever had.
I agree. Look, what I want to say, this is a perfect segue to make this point.
Segue.
Well played. Is that, look, we watch a lot of this kind of stuff, right? And it gets real easy to predict, right, how things are going to go. And from its depiction of the Phantom Zone to a number of turns throughout the season, there were numerous instances where I was genuinely surprised. And I feel like that doesn't happen a ton, and especially, again, I don't mean to always beat up on these poor CW shows, but there were so many of them and so many episodes. I mean, there was a lot to consume, and at a certain point, you kind of knew where they were going, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like here there were numerous instances. I mean, look, we'll get into what they did with Lyta this season. I mean, there were a few turns there where I was genuinely surprised, but they did it in such a way where it really, for me at least, like it kept me on my toes, and I appreciated that. Like this was a more surprising viewing experience than I typically have watching this kind of stuff, and I really appreciated that.
And we'll get into it because there's a couple of things I was going to throw out here, but I'll wait till we get to more about Lyta. That, you know, how in prequels sometimes there's certain things where like, oh, this character is safe because they have to go and do this. Well, this series has little loopholes where they might not be safe. Like, and I'll explain that more when we get there.
Yeah, but no, I'm with you. I thought this version of the Phantom Zone was great. I mean, look, having been trained on Smallville and the Supergirl show and going back to the Supergirl movie, it's like, you know, yeah, I expected them to be in a desert or the woods, a la Supernatural and Purgatory. It's like I figured out it'll be the woods.
All right, run through the woods, throw on the filter of sepia, boom, Purgatory.
Look, and you and I are both huge Supernatural fans, and I'll defend that show forever. But I know it's so funny. It's like you go to heaven and it's the woods, but it's just it's a more saturated color palette. You go to Purgatory, it's the woods, and it's just a little bit more of a desaturated color palette. It's pretty much just always the woods.
You got to throw in that dialogue like, that's how your brain perceives it. Because that's all, because it's, you know, like, so it's like, that's what you see it as. And you're just like, all right.
Yeah.
Speaking of perceiving, one thing I like about this show is when they throw the text on, it's in Kryptonian, and then it translates to English. So it's the same kind of concept in my mind. Is they're speaking Kryptonian, but they've already showed you that we're translating in English for you.
That's true. Although, did they establish that Adam Strange has a translator of some sort? I forget.
I don't know. I roll with it.
We'll roll with it. That's fine.
You know what I'm saying? I figure he's got Rand stuff. Yeah, he got a translator.
Gotcha.
It's all good.
So Brainiac is able to, long story short, manipulate Seg into using the Sunstone to kind of pierce a hole through the Phantom Zone, and they're able to escape, and they land on Colu, Brainiac's home planet. And so you get a little bit of the two of them kind of palling around and Brainiac giving a history lesson of how he came to be. And that was the woods. But it certainly worked.
I'll accept that. Woods.
Yeah, they gave us a really, really cool Phantom Zone. So I was like, all right, fine. We'll go with the woods here. Yeah, what did you think of this? Well, again, I mean, I know we talked about this last time, but just your take on this Brainiac generally and these interactions that they had at the top of the season.
Oh, he's amazing. He's creepy. He's, you know, I remember when this show premiered, it was the 40th anniversary of Superman, and a lot of the actors, Brainiac and Adam Strange, were both at Superman Celebration and everything. And it just was, I remember all, like, they were talking with him, and I was like, man, this guy has it for Brainiac. Like, he's creepy, he's intelligent, the practical looks so good. And, you know, it's just something that we have been wanting, like a really good Brainiac. And it wasn't like they gave us something new, like we talked about before, like, I'm tired of Zod, but then they gave us the perfect Zod, you know. And but Brainiac, chef's kiss.
Yeah, it's really terrific. And I forget the exact sequence here, but there eventually of course, we lead to a battle between Seg and Brainiac, and off screen, Seg apparently kills Brainiac, but what we'll later come to learn is that Brainiac is inside of Seg. And pardon me for that choice of words, but there's a fun payoff to that when we get to the end of the season and the scene with Lobo. He makes specific reference of how Seg and Brainiac are inside of each other, and he calls Seg, "You dirty dog." It was pretty funny.
Oh, also one of my favorite scenes of the season. It's just playful because Brainiac's in Seg's mind. So
yeah, but I have to say, and I want to get to the Lobo, but when Adam Strange arrives, and I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but when Adam Strange arrives on Colu, the reunion that he has with Seg was like, Seg was genuinely excited to see him and hugged him, and even Adam was surprised by that. It was I thought it was a cool moment.
Yeah, I like where they've gone. These characters have built this friendship, this bond, like Seg with Adam, and then Adam with Val, like, even, like, you know. And I don't want to skip too far, but I will just say I like the concept of the houses. That's not always about blood.
Yes.
And we'll expand on that later. But it just kind of made me think of, like, just the family bond that Val and Seg kind of bring Adam into like a deep connection with them. I do want to say, like, I love this version of Krypton. I love that it found a way to kind of include all versions of Krypton that we've seen. It has a little bit of the Smallville feel that we see like in season 9 when we had the Kandor flashback scene. It feels similar to what we see in Supergirl. It feels similar to the Hunter when you get to like the wastelands. It's more crystallized, more snow. And then it feels like we're on the ground of the Snyder Krypton more than like being the up above. So it really feels that they were able to make the planet feel unified from all of our visions.
That's a great way to put it. I would agree with that totally. So not long after Adam Strange arrives on Kolu, we meet Krypton's version, their depiction of Lobo, the intergalactic bounty hunter. What was your reaction to this Lobo?
Well, at first I was caught off guard because they made him very Scottish, like in the undertone. But then when I found out the actor was the same guy that played Jim Corrigan in Constantine, I was like, nah. Because I was like, I've seen this guy, right? And I looked it up and I was like, oh snap, he's on Constantine. And I'm not the biggest Lobo fan because to me he is just like 90s comics and just how bad and dark, and it's like he's like, we're gonna mix, biker gang, kind of Deadpool, like everything Wolverine, and just shake it up and there's Lobo. But I found him entertaining in small doses, like in the context, because he is such just a and of course he points out Seg-El's name that some people may not have caught on to. It's like Siegel. And he calls him Siegel the whole time, and he was fun. Like the scene where I remember I was watching, Solomon came in. He was 3, maybe 4 at the time, to the scene where Lobo's like saying like, I'm gonna get in there, and he like pulls his gun and shoots him. I was like, oh snap. And so I was like, whoa, and he didn't like think much more because he was so little, but and then he starts regrowing, right there. And I was just like, yeah. And then I thought about, if they do make that Lobo movie, I'm like, could I stomach it? Like, I don't know if I could take a whole movie with this as my main character. I don't know, but like here in the little bit that we get, okay, all right. He's like this wild card character,
He is. And look, shout out to one of our regular guests here, Justin DeVoe, who cosplays as Lobo and loves the character. But that is an interesting question. I mean, it's funny because I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Lobo fan in the world. I've enjoyed him in certain instances, like Superman the Animated Series and whatnot.
When he's restrained.
That's an interesting question about, is this a character that only works best in small doses, or could he sustain? I mean, look, he's had his own series and whatnot, comic book series, but yeah, could he sustain his own movie or show? I mean, there was the plan was to do a Lobo spinoff television show of Krypton, and obviously that didn't come to pass after the show's cancellation. But we almost got to get an answer to our question about whether or not this character would kind of work as the lead of a show and not just a supporting player.
Could you give him an emotional arc in a journey? Like, I don't know. Like, and
also, I wonder. This is a question for Justin, so when he listens, he can message me and chime in. But because like part of what the fun of the character, right, is that he's so over the top and so outrageous and so inappropriate. And do you, in order to build a full story around that character, do you have to sacrifice some of that? And is it a worthwhile sacrifice to make? I mean, I don't know, but they're interesting questions. But I enjoyed this take. I mean, I would say, they had the look. Did he have the physicality, the stature that you might expect from the comics? No, not necessarily. He wasn't like dwarfing the other characters, but in terms of just the look, the makeup, the costume, I feel like it felt like the character for sure.
Yeah. The physical presence, no, he wasn't as big as like what you would think of. But but the New 52 at the time, the Lobo was leaner and smaller. And then I know they kind of retconned that wasn't supposed to be the real Lobo or whatever later. But just saying, we know that it seems like a lot of the shows and stuff are a few years behind and we're pulling from like the New 52 era of comic. So if you look at that Lobo and him, yeah, it works. But yeah, I mean, I hate saying like, oh, it's the TV version, because we all know that TV can be amazing. I think he got the character. Would I want a Lobo to be a little bit bigger? Yeah, because as part of that, he's oversized and just like crazy big and everything. But I think the actor did great.
He really did. Yes, I mean, that's the thing. I think that, he didn't dwarf the other characters the way you might have expected. And the accent definitely took a minute to just get used to, because again, you wouldn't necessarily expect Scottish Lobo. But in terms of the personality, man, it was there. And there was the one moment where he has Seg and Adam tied up, or Seg-El and Adam tied up to the tree. And I think it's Seg was like, I've never heard of you. And the Lobo just starts laughing, right? Like, this prospect is just so ridiculous that you haven't heard of Lobo, this renowned bounty hunter. And Seg starts laughing, and they're all just laughing. And Seg has a Cameron Cuff shout out, has this great delivery. He's like, I really don't know who you are. He's just like laughing through it. But I thought that was so funny. It genuinely made me laugh.
What I think is interesting, and this is with that kind of like he hadn't heard of him, is I like in this show the idea that Krypton had not got interstellar travel.
Yeah.
Like Brainiac has, obviously Lobo has, Adam has through the Zeta beams, but I like the idea that Krypton can't leave their planet. And that's part of what goes on in this season, because I think that's what makes the rocket for Kal-El even more, because it was supposed to be a prototype, so the idea, like going back to season 1, where the idea of an alien and stuff was,
yeah, Val was executed for that notion.
So the fact that Lobo's like, you never heard of me, like, I love it. It's kind of like a callback to season 1 if you're paying attention.
Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Yeah, no, for sure. No, I have to say this. So Seg is on Kolu. He's away from Krypton for the first 3 episodes of the season, and I didn't know. Again, this is the first time that I was watching, so I didn't know how long this was going to last. I was like, because you want him to get back to Krypton, you want him to interact with all the characters and get in on the action. But I felt like they struck a nice balance here, where you had, again, a few episodes, and then he's back where you want him to be. So I felt like they kind of walked that line nicely, where you felt, the other characters felt his absence for a long enough period of time. But then, look, in a 10-episode season, you don't have a ton of real estate here, so I'm glad they got him back to Krypton when they did. And to your point, before he and Adam make it back, they enter this chamber on Kolu to extract Brainiac from Seg's mind. And that's where we have this whole business where there's this force field keeping Lobo out, and he shoves his arm through, right? His arm gets chopped off, and then he blows off his head, and then the rest of his body sort of regrows from the arm inside, right? Was that the bit?
Yep.
So again,
it's funny because it's just sitting there, and then the camera cuts back, and it's focusing on Seg and Adam, and you're seeing where they're pulling out Brainiac. And all of a sudden you hear something that cuts back, and there's Lobo's full arm and the upper part of Lobo growing. And you see like it, and Adam's like, what the? It's funny.
Side note about Adam. When last we saw him, right, he was saving Seg and Kem, I think, from the suicide bomber, the poor little girl. And he used his Zeta beam. And then when we saw him in the finale, he was in one of Brainiac's bottles, and it looked like Earth, and there was a statue of Zod there. Right? And we later come to find that was in fact Earth, and this is showing kind of the long-term consequences of this new future that they've created. But to remind me, at the top of the season, when he shows up on Krypton, did they explain how he got out of there? Or I guess he just Zeta beamed out of there. It wasn't a problem.
Yeah, that was my like rationale. I was like, yeah, he just Zeta beamed, because then he says like something was off, because like eventually like he has issues with them, but then they're working fine. So
while we're on this note of cheats here, we gotta take a moment here. So Lyta's mother, Jaina, the former high command of the Sagittari, she had her whole journey over the course of the season and became part of these outlaws. And there came a point in the first season where she challenged Zod, and they engaged in battle. And Lyta chose to shoot her mother, to save her time traveling son. It's quite the conundrum. But when last we saw Jaina at the end of the first season, she was, if I remember correctly, unconscious and being carried away by this mysterious figure. Now, earlier in the first season, we had flashbacks to Jaina's upbringing, this very rigorous training that she and her brother were put through, and they had to make this treacherous journey through the ice. And she made the very, very cold, no pun intended, decision to leave her brother behind and fulfill the task that she had been charged with, right, by her father. But look, we've seen a lot of these shows before. So as we're watching that first season and we're seeing that flashback with Jaina and her brother, you're like, well, of course the brother's still out there. He's one of these ice people. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, at the end of the first season, we see Lyta carried away by this mysterious figure. And it's like, oh, it's the brother. And then at the top of the season, it initially seems to be the case, right? Where it's her brother, they're having all these conversations. And then whether it's the first or second, I forget exactly which episode it is, but you come to find that this brother was just in her mind, right? Because they're having this conversation, and then she looks away and she turns back and he's gone. And the camera shows us behind her, right? And there's only one set of footprints in the snow. And it's a cool reveal. But again, going back to cheats, I don't think, how did you feel about that?
I think at first it took me a minute to remember how it ended the first season, because I watched this as it aired. It's like I watched the first season, and then I didn't go back and rewatch it before watching the second season. So it didn't come to me till much later. And then I was just like, maybe they changed their mind of what they were going to do with this character, or maybe it was going to be something else. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to chalk it up in headcanon that she just imagined her brother saving her the way maybe she wished she would have saved her brother. And that's what I went with.
I agree. I'd have to go back and look at her last scene from the first season. My memory of it is that she was full on unconscious, but maybe she was awake to some extent. And yeah, she was saving herself. She was crawling to safety, but she was imagining her brother. It's just, again, when I say cheat, it's like if the character is out cold and the audience is seeing this, it's like, I don't know that that's really fair to then say, oh, this guy was just in her head all along. But again, I'll allow it. It's one of the few nitpicks I have about this, because I really enjoyed this, really like top to bottom.
I mean, I agree with you, but it also makes me just kind of wonder, as they were like kind of retooling things a little, like, was it an oversight? Like, were they going to make it her brother like the whole time? And then they're like, no, we don't have time to develop this character or whatever. We're just going to make it this. And then they did it and then forgot how they,
if I had to guess, I would say that was a pivot. I feel like they maybe got to the point where they were like, once she's recuperated and she's going to rejoin the fight, she very quickly gets paired up with Dev M in more ways than one, which we could talk about.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, just like where that was going. I was like,
Yeah,
just like,
so Dev M, one of the members of the Sagittari, who was meant to bind with Lyta and really had love for Lyta, but she really only had eyes for Seg. And when we catch up with him in this season, he's deserted the Sagittari for the path that Lyta and Zod had led them down. More on Lyta to come. And so he ends up teaming up with Jaina, and they share a number of intimate moments, not intimate in terms of not sexually, but like
physical,
but in terms of embraces, and just sort of, they each have a moment, scenes in different episodes where they break down crying with one another, and the other is there to comfort. And so it does turn romantic by the end of the season, and they share a kiss. And from what I've read about season 3, the proposed season 3, they would have been a full-fledged couple, and we could talk more about that too. But yeah, it was interesting. And again, yes, a very very tricky dynamic here, where he's been again, her daughter has been his primary love interest, and now he and the mother are moving in this direction. But there you go.
Hey, it's Krypton. Just I think there's a very interesting dynamic that Zod brings in while in this season. Just Drew. I'll say Drew because we have more than one Zod. The nature versus nurture theme, because especially from the maternal point, because we are not naturally conceiving these children. There are, just your genetic material get added together, and boom, they create this child. And this, what that dynamic does, what that theme does. And my question through this to you, what happens to Seg? When is Drew supposed to be created, conceived? Because I couldn't remember. You mentioned in your episode, you think that Drew was born naturally, and did they ever flat out say it was, or was he something that like later Seg and Lyta bonded and created a child? Or they never go into the paradox that is Drew undoing his creation.
I don't have answers, but I share those questions.
Because, he says, I didn't grow up with a father and all this. So I'm like, so part of me's thinking like, did JOR-EL grow up with a father? Or is something going to happen to Seg? Like, and this was before the show was canceled, like that Seg's going to die. So neither of the children grow up with a dad. Like something happens. And I just kept trying to point, like, when is Drew supposed to have been created? So
it's a valid question, and one I don't have an answer for. I guess, Zach and I talked about this last time of, are the Kryptonians in this show, is it just that they've chosen this Genesis chamber method, or are they unable to bear children naturally? And so I had touched on this a moment ago, but let me bring it up here. So the gentleman online, Ryan Unicombe, and he had I guess gotten in touch with the producers and got a rundown of what the proposed third season was going to be. Nice. And he has an Instagram post about it, and it's quite thorough. I'll kind of maybe sprinkle in a few things here and there, especially when we talk about how this season ends. But one of the things that was going to come in the season 3 that we never got was that there was going to be this Red K virus, otherwise known as Virus X, on the show. So kind of a nice callback to the pre-crisis comics, that would have made the Kryptonians fertile again and capable of having children naturally, but it also would have caused this sickness or madness. I forget exactly what track they were going with it. So it seems like this was the only way they were able to. So presumably at some point, Lyta and Seg would have used the chamber, or he would have been conceived during this Red K episode. I'm not sure. What I will say is that I felt like they really eased up on the whole time travel aspect. I mean, there's a bit, just at one point where Adam talks about how he got a glimpse of the future and there was nothing there. So he's afraid he's just destroyed everything. But as far as what the implications of all of this are, I really felt like, and I'd be curious to know behind the scenes what the thought process was and what the conversations were. Cause it felt like they were just kind of like, we'll just do our own thing here. And maybe they figured at a certain point, whenever the show ended, like, all right, well, they'll put the pieces back together. Right.
Yeah. That'd be my question. Like, did they have like a little bit of an end plot? Like, cause they kind of, we never got like in season 2, no cape.
No, the last time we see it in season 1, the House of L symbol, changes to a Zod symbol, but that's it. You never see it.
And once again, I have to reiterate what's been said. And I think the Zod symbol, it annoys me that we do not have like a comic, like, this is Zod. Every time Zods come up, in Smallville, it's kind of that Z thing, and then in Man of Steel, like it was kind of like almost like a hint towards Darkseid because it's like a turned looking Omega symbol. And I like the Zod symbol here. Why can't like DC come out and say this is Zod? Like, why is every time Zod comes up, like it is a character that's been used so much, but yet never been able to like funnel down like what Zod's supposed to look like and what the house symbol is.
That's fair. I also want to go back to something you said a moment ago. Is it weird hearing the characters refer to him as Drew? Does that take away some of the mystique of the character? And I know it's DRU, which is a little more exotic, but still.
it is odd, because for the longest time, I didn't even know his first name was Drew. I just Zod, and then you find out that's his last name. And it is just weird, because you have Lyta Zod, and you're like, oh, Jaina Zod. And then you have Drew Zod, and you're like, oh, that's Zod.
I know, it's like Jeff Zod. It's like, all right, that's fine.
Hey, Jeff. Jeff Zod.
It's fine. I want to just, again, real quick, just circle back to Kolu for a second here, because I had posted about this and you and I messaged about it, but there's such a great moment where Seg is squaring off with Lobo on Kolu, and he cocks his arms just like Henry Cavill did in the Mission Impossible movie. It was great.
I remember Cameron Cuff like added on a tweet. He's like, where do you think, your grandson learned it? Like under like a picture of Henry doing it. He's like, yeah, runs in the family or something like that. Like, it was just like, yeah.
It was such a cool moment. I loved it.
It was, I had hope that you would catch it. Like when you were watching it, I was like, I'm definitely going to call it out, but I'm like, I hope he catches it because he'll enjoy it so much more.
I did. And then again, before Adam and Seg depart Krypton, like we said, there's this business about trying to remove Brainiac, the nanites from Seg. And look, we've been down this road with Chloe in Smallville, right? Just as one example, that there's always some remnant of Brainiac that remains. So even though it seemed like Seg was in the clear as they left Kolu and returned to Krypton, we knew that wasn't going to be the case. And for a good part of the rest of the season, we have part of Brainiac still residing within Seg and sort of giving him this knowledge and abilities. And there's this one moment in particular. I mean, it pops up a few times, but the one scene in particular when you have Seg and Dev and Jaina in Fort Roz, right, fighting their way out. Go for it.
This was a scene I wanted to say like this. It was so much fun because like Brainiac's like behind you, and he's just like turning and shooting, and then he does like the, and he's just like kind of like looks at Dev and Jaina like, and he's just like taking everybody out. Like it was so fun.
And their responses were terrific, especially Jaina, like the look on her face of just like, how are you possibly able to do this? It was really cool. It was a lot of fun.
It's just one of those scenes that it just put a big smile on my face because it was so goofy.
Yeah.
But it was so great. Like Cameron Cuff's face when he's doing the scene where he's just like, he's like, I don't know, just good, like it's great.
Yeah, no. It was really cool. I guess while we're on this note of talking about Brainiac, eventually we do get to kind of where I started this discussion in the episode Zods and Monsters, where Val and Nyssa in the fortress are able to extract what's left of Brainiac from Seg. But then Brainiac takes over the Val hologram and sort of changes up his MO. Rather than trying to bottle up Kandor, realizes that the best of Krypton resides in the L bloodline. And in a truly heartbreaking moment, takes the newly rechristened baby JOR-EL.
I know, it was so, dude. And the fact that like, that is like one of those scenes that I would have expected in the last episode. Like that could have been my cliffhanger, but no, like he takes him, like you said, episode 7. And I was just like, oh. And then you're like, well, that's a setup for season 3.
You have, truly like their reactions. And look, for both of us as parents, it's like it's the worst fear. And in this instance in particular, because this is an adversary, they have no means of reaching, of tracking, right? So that adds a whole other dimension to it. And when we get to the end of the season and Nyssa steals the Zeta beam projector from Adam, It's like, yeah, I would 1000% do that. It's like, you do what you got to do.
She baits Adam. She baits him. She starts asking questions about the Zeta beams and everything. And then she takes him. He's like, oh, you set me. Yeah.
Yeah. And we end, I know I'm jumping around, but hopefully this all tracks together because we are following certain threads all the way through here. So I think this will make sense for the audience, even if you haven't watched the season. It's funny because even during the episode with Zach, he was like, I hope people follow what we're saying, but I listened back to it after. I'm like, I think it all holds together.
Yeah, it holds together. But I mean, it is so many, like, if we're not going to go like episode by episode and beat by beat, like we're just kind of traveling the threads of the overarching narrative, like, it is a very dense, well done show with multiple characters. And I hate how forgotten it is.
Yeah.
Like, that's what bugged me, is like, it's one of those shows I like to bring up whenever we can. And at the end of the episode, I'll give you my pitch. Like, I'll tell my pitch that I gave you about how tie it into Superman and Lois. But yeah, I think they can track us, that because we're talking about characters. And if not, you know what, if you can't track us, go watch the season and come back and listen.
Yeah. I mean, I do genuinely hope that, and
it is on Max, isn't it?
No, I don't think I'm almost positive. I mean, folks, double check. And look, if you're listening to this years after we recorded it, really check. But as of this recording, I'm pretty sure it's available to purchase digitally from all the usual places, but I don't believe it's streaming on any of the subscription services. But the DVDs and Blu-rays are relatively affordable. And I'll say this too, look, for all the stuff we talked about.
The first episode's on YouTube for free?
Oh, well, that's cool. Well, that's at least something. At least check out the
pilot.
pilot.
That is at least something.
But it's like, for all the stuff that we talk about here, I usually, I'm usually not quick to be like, guys, you got to go out and read this or watch this. This is one of those rare instances where I'm like, look, if you're into Superman and you've been following these discussions and whatnot, I mean, I would imagine that what we've said has hopefully made you intrigued enough to check it out. And this is one of those rare instances where I'm going to go out on a limb and be like, I really recommend giving this show a watch. And I say this as someone who foolishly skipped it the first time and really found a lot to enjoy this time around. So, just to kind of put that out there. But yeah, the season ends with we see Brainiac on his ship, and he refers to JOR-EL as his son. And then we see the ship approaching Earth. And going back to the proposal for season 3, a big part of it was going to be, crazy enough as though this sounds, Brainiac raising JOR-EL on Earth. And it was going to be like a very twisted version of what Kal-El would experience under the care of Jonathan and Martha. So that's really where we were heading. And on the note of Nyssa, we talked about how she steals the Zeta beam. We were going to find out in season 3 that she was actually a Thanagarian, that her father, Darren Vex, was Thanagarian and had actually killed the real Darren Vex on Krypton and assumed his identity. And she becomes Hawkwoman, which ties back to what I talked about with Zach last time, when at the Comic-Con panel, Jeff Johns was like, oh, we're going to have Hawkwoman. He was talking about season 1 though, and clearly they never pulled the trigger on that. But the plan was for Nyssa to become Hawkwoman in the second season. So they had some big plans.
Wow. Because when I was listening to talk about Hawkwoman, I just thought, because Nyssa kind of got dropped in the Rand Thanagarian War, and Darkseid was, we got the Omega sign, the Apocalypse even was just kind of there. And I was like, oh, so that's where Hawkwoman would come in at, But dang, that would have been interesting, because we believe that this Nyssa is a clone.
Right. Yes.
That's part of the storyline, that she's trying to find out who she is, and that's part of why she hates the Vex name and hates her father, who is alive and gets killed like a chump. Okay. And it's part of why she wants to leave that all behind, is she finds out like the real Nyssa Vex died. And man, I'm gonna sit with that. Like, I don't know if I like her being Thanagarian or not. I don't know. I'm gonna sit with that.
It's a whole thing. But yeah, I don't think we even mentioned that when we were talking about season 1, but yeah, this whole business about how the Kryptonian elite utilize the Genesis chamber to essentially replace themselves or parts of themselves as needed through this cloning process. And yeah, Nyssa finds out that she had died as a young girl and was replaced with a clone. So there's all of that as well. But so kind of, we've talked about Seg getting out of the Phantom Zone, dealing with Brainiac and Lobo, and reuniting with Adam Strange and all the Kolu business. And we followed some of the other threads on Krypton and Corvex and JOR-EL, all that. But I want to kind of circle back now to I guess like the central conflict throughout the season and what sort of ties all of this together, which is you have those who refuse Zod's rule, the rebels, right, who have amassed on the moon Wegthor, and you have Val-El, and you have Jaxor. So it's like when you have Jaxor and you have a moon, that moon is not gonna fare too well. Although I was surprised at how the moon was ultimately destroyed. But so that's their base. And it's a key location because it contains deposits of stellarium, which is this element that Zod needs to fuel his interstellar fleet to make Krypton the intergalactic conqueror that he wants it to be.
Yeah, Zod which is interesting because it's interesting. Like, do we ever fully understand where his desire of just conquering comes from?
Okay. So you were on the same page. I don't know, maybe we're coming at this from slightly different ways, but this is something I wanted to ask you about because I love this take on Zod, and I love Colin Salmon's performance. It's terrific. It's like Zach and I talked about last time. It's like I don't know that we've ever had a bad Zod, and he's definitely among one of the top ones we've had. But in terms of the writing in particular, he's so single-minded in focus. He's so zeroed in on conquest, and I wonder if maybe we could have added a few more layers there, or did you find him compelling enough on that front?
I found him compelling at parts because of what he does to get what he wants and where to go. I always try to find my headcanon or rationale. Like, does he know that there's no way to save Krypton, the planet? So his only thing is if we spread out and conquer, that's how we'll have a new planet. Something I'll ask you here in a second, but like that's kind of where my thought process is he wants to save Krypton, but he knows there is no saving the planet. Like, and I wish they kind of would have went into that a little bit more. Like, there is nothing that we can do to save the planet. It's gonna, it is doomed no matter what. And Zod's whole thing is, well, we'll leave, but we'll leave with power that no one can make us, subservient. We will take what we want. We will be the conquerors and we'll always be on top. My question to you, and I thought about this a lot through this and then other things. When Kryptonians come to Earth, they have powers. Wouldn't it have been neat if Adam Strange went to Krypton and he had powers under the Red Sun? Kind of like if our biology and stuff are so similar, why is not happening? Much like in Smallville, where our friend Zach is right now, where the Kandorians make the sun red so that they can flip and have powers because of what was done to them. What if it had given Earthling powers too?
Oh, that would have been interesting.
Just because we're supposed to be so similar, but yet there's a difference, and it's the yellow sun. So what happens if, we are under their sun? I'm just like, that could have been something interesting with the Adam Strange story. As he went on, he started finding himself a little faster. We're not talking full on Superman, but maybe like, Golden Age Superman. He can run a little faster. He's a little bit stronger. And he starts to become more of like this hero character, like folk hero type thing, because he's experiencing their atmosphere. I don't know. Just something there.
That is interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Why didn't Seg start getting powers on Kolu?
Oh, yeah.
Because that'd be a way if you wanted to write something fun, like all of a sudden Seg gets some heat vision, because I love my heat vision, fighting Brainiac because he's got like a yellow sun. They didn't throw enough of a filter on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. These are good questions. I mean, I don't know. But
because I'm saying about my wife, I said something the other night and she's like, that was funny. I'm like, I know it was. I said it.
But this back and forth between the rebels and Zod and his forces, again, this drives a lot of the season. And there's the space elevator between Krypton and Wegthor. At one point, Nyssa is sent to Wegthor to infiltrate by Zod, who has taken Korvex. This is earlier in the season. And she feeds information to the rebels that allows them to take out some of Zod's forces and obtain their oxygen respirators. And man, they don't, like I said before, this show really surprised me in a lot of ways and kept me on my toes. But if there was one thing that they really telegraphed, it was this. Because man, they kept me in the number of times that Jaxor or Val talked about how, oh, we'll use the respirators that we took from Zod's forces. It's like, oh no, guys, don't. It's really going to be bad, and it ends up proving the case. But
I mean, with that same thing, if Zod's mind's so much about Krypton, he sacrifices and kills so many Kryptonians. Like, their civil war is so bad. How they just start killing each other in battle. And I'm just, I've always kind of had this headcanon in my mind, like, as Krypton approached more of its last days, the planet had just come under with, civil war, disease, or whatever. It had shrunk the population down so much. Like, I always like the idea that when Krypton exploded, it mainly had a few million people left. Like, just you had the 3 main cities. That was all that's left. So the idea of like someone like JOR-EL might be prominent because there aren't that many Kryptonians left. And I like in this, like, the idea that Zod's turned them against each other so much that they're killing each other without really thinking about what's going on. I mean, there are times where it gets, especially like when they do that charge and she's running, doing like the 300, run on the side, and she's like, boom, slices some dude. Like, it's brutal.
it is. And that's at the end where she's now fighting against Zod's forces. But yeah, I think that this whole notion of what Zod has wrought and what it takes for Zod to fulfill his vision, some of which we see, some of which we're told about, but this whole somatic reconditioning, this whole idea that he is literally reprogramming people who disagree with him or imprisoning people who disagree with him, waging this war with the rebels on the moon, again, allowing these tainted respirators to be taken so that when the rebels then use them to try to cross the moon, they are they end up suffocating, right? Because they're using these respirators that he sent up there. So, but what I liked about this was that, and I know I'm jumping ahead, and I kind of want to save this a little bit more for a few minutes, but you do ultimately see that those around him, the forces around him, this ultimately registers with them, that what he's doing does not seem to line up with what he's preaching about a unified Krypton and Kryptonian life above all else, because he's responsible for so much of that Kryptonian life being lost. And you have ultimately the people do turn on him. And I thought that was, I really appreciated sort of this like battle for the soul of Krypton. And I liked where that landed. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here. And there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth crowdfunder. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Support this project by going to crowdfunder.com, that's crowdfunder without an E, /Paragonscomic, and read a free sample. Also, Perry, who's been a guest on the show, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about superheroes in media. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah. I think they wrote to where you could have done some sort of maybe a redemption arc for Zod in the 3rd season. About just, and I say redemption like in the term of like Star Wars, very lighthearted redemption, where he does try to do something good. But yeah, it is one of those like, and maybe we'll learn more about him because there are the lines that are dropped about growing up without a father and what he went through, and we see patterns of how Zods raise their children. And if you look at it's hard with the time travel element because it changes so many people's behavior. You look at the track that Jaina was taking Lyta, and then if Lyta fully embraced that, if she would have had a son, and then Seg's dead, how she would have raised Drew, and it just continues that trajectory of the way Zods raise their children. You think you add in the intelligence of an L, but with that warrior, because I mean we see that both Jaina and Lyta do kind of puff themselves up when they walk, like they are House Zod. So I mean, you can kind of start to see where Drew would have been like that. So
for sure. So look, speaking of Lyta, we got to talk about this. This was, I thought, one of the most fascinating pieces of this season, because when we left season 1, again, she's at the right hand of Zod as he's making the speech about how everyone will kneel before him. And in the early part of this season here, we see Lyta making quite a number of, shall we say, questionable choices. She's responsible for the execution of Darren Vex, right? In order to lure Nyssa out. She is not only aware of, but actually participating in and ordering some of this somatic reconditioning of people.
mm-hmm.
There's one of the fellow Sagittari who reminds her of Seg. And there's this brief moment, this poor guy who's like, oh, she's interested in me. And then she like just beats the crap out of him.
Oh yeah, that was intense.
So she's making all. Was there? I know there's more stuff that's escaping me at the moment, but other choices, other things she does that at that point in the season that really kind of make you doubt. Anything else that stands out?
I mean, just where she was. I don't want to say that she was weak in the first season, but she showed compassion and tried to understand. And it's like this fully self-actualized version of Lyta had Jaina done everything she thought, but then she jumped over the shark, and she's just it's almost like the self-actualized version of what Drew would want his mom to be.
Yes.
Like this Lyta is his mom in the sense of she's everything that he would want from her. So it kind of makes you wonder about maybe where their relationship was in the initial timeline of how they were, because this is like what I want from my mom. Like he was creating the mom that he always wished he had.
No, that's a good point. And I remember the other key piece of this that I wanted to mention, which is when Seg initially returns to Krypton from Kolu, and he's, storms into Fort Roz, and he reunites with Lyta, and they have a reunion, and they bang. And it is what it is. And
Yeah.
But at this point in the story, I think Zod had taken, or Lyta or Zod, right, had taken Corvex, and this is when Nyssa had been sent to Wegthor, and so again, the baby is in the care of the Zods at this point, and Seg, at least has the moment where he can meet his son, and Lyta makes a comment about how we can be together with our son, and Seg does a double take, right, because it's like, well, he has a mother, right, and that's Nyssa. So this is all to say that Lyta's behavior, right, in the first part of the season, and this is, I think, the brilliance of the show, and I really give them a lot of credit because it's far enough where you say, ooh, this isn't quite the Lyta that we knew, right? The Lyta who was so concerned about the rankless initiative in the first season and wanting to make sure that the people down below weren't harmed and that the orders were carried out fairly and humanely, right? So it's far enough where it feels like a departure from that. But this is also a Lyta who had been put in this position where she had to choose between her son and her mother, and she's haunted by the decision that she made. And most importantly, Seg has been gone. It's been 6 months, right, when this picks up again. So for all she knows, she'll never see him again. And so the idea that the choices she's made and what she's been through and what we haven't seen in those 6 months and the grief that she's gone through, thinking that Seg is gone forever, the behavior is not so far gone where you're like, oh, she's not herself, it's not her. It tracks enough where you're like, well, maybe she got to this point. At least that's how I felt. How did you feel with this?
I mean, I'm pretty much the same. I mean, it's just kind of like she chose this and now she's living in her choices. She's, she kind of gets overlooked, devalued, tossed around in the first season. And now it's kind of like, it's almost like a woman who's taking charge of her life and of herself, which is kind of cliche when you think about what this actually is. But you got to think about how Seg was like, oh, he's into her and everything, but then you have the Nyssa angle, her mom's, not really embracing her, and then her son shows up. It's just so weird, like her son, old son, and she chooses that, and so you're kind of like, you can kind of see, like you said, wow, in these 6 months, look what she's become, and you buy it. Like, there's enough there. You're like, yeah, I see it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I give them a lot of credit because they could have made her so over the top where you're like, oh, it's clearly something's gone on with her. And I was almost forgetting this. So I thought this was interesting too, where, there's a lot of back and forth, and some of the details might have already escaped my memory here, but
it's dense.
Seg is convinced that she's been subjected to this somatic reconditioning. And at first it seems like she hasn't, but then he finds these secret records, right, where she had been. So that's
smooth how he gets it. He's like, he just talking. He's like, you know who I am? You know who my son is? Which I have to chuckle because it's like, your son is, it's like, yeah, my son, Drew Zod, the savior of Krypton. Like, and I was just like, well, yeah.
No, I know. But then, he uncovers that she's been subjected to this procedure, but then it's, I think, Zod later who's like, all I did was remove her guilt, right? Like, essentially that she wasn't programmed to the point where she doesn't know what she's doing, right? So there's all this back and forth where you're not quite sure, what is she really cognizant of and responsible for? To what extent has she been manipulated? And then we get the two biggest turns of the season when it comes to Lyta. First, when she is, spoiler alert, seemingly executed, her throat slit by Jax-Ur on Wegthor because she's, she convinces Zod to let her join the battle up on the moon, and she gets taken. And the demand is that, if Zod's forces don't retreat, Jax-Ur will execute Lyta. And as much as Zod promises that he will, of course, it turns out that he still has his forces there, and this is uncovered. And Jax-Ur holds true to her word, and on a broadcast to all of Krypton, or Kandor City, slits the throat of Lyta. I mean, again, I know it's been a while since you watched this the first time, right? But do you remember what your reaction was? Was there any part of you that's like, oh my God, they actually killed her?
My first thought was, oh my God, they actually killed her. And I thought, well, she doesn't have to be there to make Drew. Like, that's what I was saying. Like, that's the loophole by just putting your genetic material in the bank. I mean, in all reality, you could walk up there, put your finger in one time, and they could just pull up your file like Seg and Lyta, Seg and Nyssa, Seg and, so, we did get a scene in the first scene with her and Dev I don't remember, but like, it is not above thought that she already has her genetic information in the database. So she doesn't actually have to physically birth Zod. So I was like, they could have just done that, because that could have been your catalyst for even more things. So I bought in. I mean, and I was watching this as it aired. I bought them on iTunes. So of course, they would broadcast it. The next day it would drop. I'd watch it. So I was watching it as live as possible. So of course, like, I get up, I watch the episode. So I have to wait another week to find out what happened. So, we were reviewing at the time, and some of those episodes got lost. That's a long story, but I just remember being like, I was in, because I'm like, there's not really a reason why they don't have to do this.
Man, I concur, and I'll share. It got me. I was genuinely surprised. Going back to what I said to Zach last week, there's so much about the show that's like surprising yet inevitable. Like, there are certain things where, and that's a good example where it's like, well, it totally makes sense that Jax-Ur, of all characters, right, would hold true to her word. When we pick up with that character, right, 6 months have passed. She's lost her eye. She's got the cybernetic eye. So, she's been through it, and she's this military tactician. So the idea that now, on the other hand, you can argue like, well, maybe executing this person in front of everyone won't necessarily like pull the people over to your side. I think in terms of strategy, it was a little dubious, but it's still,
that's why she has Val, though.
Yes.
Like, it's like this thing where it's like, her cause can still go on, even if Val's kind of leading, because Val's like the different voice. But I love the performance, because there is the hesitancy. If you watch the little beats beforehand where she gets nervous because like there's the issues with the broadcast. They find out the forces are there and she hesitates and then she just does it. You know, so it's not like she just did it. Like you could see in the character, there was buildup of, I don't know if I really want to do this and go through with this.
Yeah. And you get, it's at least one episode, maybe two, where they're mourning her and you really think like that's it. And also too, like for me watching this, there's only 2 seasons and, you know, we're deep into the season at this point. So I was kind of like, okay, like maybe they killed her off. But then, as I said, her death was the first of 2 genuinely surprising turns. And the second is that we find out the Lyta who was murdered on Wegthor was a clone. And this fan of the Spider-Man clone saga was absolutely delighted. And that Zod has had the real Lyta all this time under the influence of the Black Mercy. I mean, this show is like, chef's kiss.
It killed me so hard to not want to talk. Like I had to dance around Black Mercy stuff when you and I talked about it because this was like a good live action version. And I remember saying it was on Krypton, but I didn't go too much into it. I was just like, because I didn't want to give that spoiler. And what I love is you're not thinking clone, but I mean, they set it up in the first season and with the Nissa stuff. So it's there. It's not like it came out of nowhere. Like there's prominence for it. So you're like, oh snap. But it wasn't so in your face that you knew it all along.
What I was kicking myself about was like, it didn't bother me that I didn't predict she was actually alive, but I feel like I should have predicted that they would have replaced her after the fact with a clone, right? Because that had totally, but I was so in it and it just felt like, okay, I bought what they were showing me. But, and again, I feel like on a lesser show, they would have then just, again, you know, Zod would have recreated her with the clone, but no, it's like the idea that had been the clone and the real one was under the Black Mercy. And I think what really kept me on my toes was that, again, you had all of this business about the somatic reconditioning. Like there were just so many questions about what was going on with her, but it still felt enough like her. Like you feel like she could have had this turn naturally. It was great. But then the sense of relief when she's actually there and she's back and she's the quote unquote good Lyta that we knew. It was great.
What did you think of the Black Mercy? Just the way they did it.
It was disgusting. But yeah. Probably true to true to life. I mean, if it were a real thing, I mean, the fact that it's got all these tentacles and just like really latches on, it's like down your throat. I mean, it was pretty great. Oh my God, when she wakes up from it and she pulls it out of herself and she's like puking it up, and when she had her reunion with Seg and they're kissing, all I could think of was like, was there any mouthwash anywhere around here? Because this is disgusting.
That's a good one. Oh man. But I like how the Black Mercy plays a dual role. I know we haven't really touched on it yet, but they're using the Black Mercy to build something to help mind control a certain other character. If that's where you want to talk about, I don't want to jump the gun on that one.
No, go for it.
Well, they're using Black Mercy extract to help control Doomsday, so that Doomsday will be submissive to Zod. And I thought that was a neat way of, using the Black Mercy. Like it's organic how it shows up. Like, Zod had it, knowledge of it. So it doesn't feel like it's so left, like out of left field, or forced. Like you had talked last week and we're talking now, homages and things that get done that aren't like, oh, here's this because this, or we brought this in, this character. Everything felt very organic to why it's there, and not only having it to subdue Lyta, but the idea that he had it because it was a way to start to control Doomsday.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the perfect place to go to Doomsday. The last thing, just to kind of button up the Lyta of it, at the episode where you find out that she's under the thrall of the Black Mercy, that episode opens, I believe, with one of her visions, right, of this fantasy. So, but this is before you see her and the Black Mercy. So you start this episode and it's like this idyllic fantasy right? Where she and Seg are together and you're not quite sure. And I like the way that unfolded, because on the heels of an episode or two where her character is dead and off the board, you're really not expecting it. And you figure it's Seg having this fantasy at some point, or it's going to be a dream. Like, you really don't know. And so I appreciated it. But oh my God, the doomsday of it all. I think ultimately this would be my number one on-screen depiction. Although I have to say the ending of season 3 of Superman and Lois gives it a run for its money. I love how that emerged, and the note that we ended on, and the Rocky 3 finish and all of that. But
that's my favorite like battle, but this one's my favorite look, because I feel like it's closer to the comic book. I mean, it does have like looks like an old man with a beard face, but the overall body and everything is closer to what I would want for Doomsday.
I mean, this so look, we're well versed in the comic book lore, and that Superman Doomsday Hunter Prey miniseries by Dan Jurgens, right? Shortly after the death and return of Superman, where you find out that Doomsday was this ancient Kryptonian experiment, right? And this idea that he was constantly killed and revived, and with each death and resurrection, he was able to withstand whatever had destroyed him before. And so that allows him to evolve over the course of all of these experiments into this unstoppable killing machine. So we have that sort of Kryptonian experiment piece. Then, as we've talked about here, and our buddy Zach has talked about a lot on Always Hold On to Smallville when he covered season 8, the Smallville TV show gave us this whole other spin, born out of the constraints of CW television budgets, but they made it work, where this, again, is this idea of the experiment, but with a human side, this human camouflage that allows the monster to blend in with society. And that gave us Davis Bloom, this like tragic figure, right? And that's its own conversation. But the idea of a human component to the monster, right, was something that Smallville gave us. And then, out of nowhere, this little 2-season Syfy show, here comes Krypton, that gives us this like perfect blend of the two, where we get flashbacks. Is it in that Zods and Monsters episode, or is it a different one?
I think
like it's that one.
I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Where we get flashbacks to long ago on Krypton, where you have a member of the House of El and the House of Zod, and there's this, Kryptonian civil war, right? And they're trying to, again, develop this means of ending the war. And we meet poor Dax, right? This Kryptonian with a unique genetic structure, right? I guess this capability to evolve. I think that's right. This sort of the idea of it. And played by, his name is escaping me at the moment, but he played...
This is like Spaz or something. Like,
Staz,
he has an interesting name.
Staz.
Yeah.
But he played William Day on the final season or final 2 seasons of Supergirl.
Supergirl. And yeah, my first reference to Krypton was all of a sudden the last season of Supergirl, he just changes into Doomsday, because he's actually Doomsday the whole time, calling back to this show. Oh, that's what, like, I have all kinds of jokes I made throughout that final Supergirl run with him. Ever since he joined the show, I was like, he's going to be Doomsday. Yeah, of course that didn't happen, but yeah.
That would have, my God, that would have been badass, man. That would have been cool.
Right. You just would have been like, oh my God, where'd this come from? It's like, watch Krypton. But it gave you like, he's like, he wants to be a hero and, help Krypton. He's like, I have the genetic to do this. And we see them like the first, like where they set him on fire, and then he pops up and they're like, and he's just burning. And the L is more of the heartless one.
Oh yeah.
And she is tough. And then they're like, and then they watch and he dies. And they're like, resurrection protocol, press the button. Comes, and then they're like, experiment number, they kill him again. I mean, they just,
yeah, it's this whole thing where it's like, again, like you said, like they burn him, and then it's like, okay, test number 1 failed. Resurrection protocol. He comes back, they burn him again. This time it doesn't kill him. It's like, okay, test number 1, like success. And then they keep moving on. And but at the beginning of this, like he's enlisted for this. He signed up. He wants to do his part for Krypton, and he has it's a heartbreaking farewell with his wife, right? And they have this bit where, they each put their finger on either side of the glass, and but they don't know exactly what this process is going to entail or what this is going to do to him. And it's not totally dissimilar from what Superman and Lois gave us, where Lex is, continually putting that poor Bizarro right through through these horrific experiments to ultimately turn him into Doomsday. So there's this brutality to it, and it's tough to watch and stomach. And you're right, the L is more about it than the Zod. Although I have to say, like, it did make me laugh where it takes the Zod until like experiment 100, yeah, or like there are hundreds of experiments in where he's like, oh, I think we should stop. It's like, oh, now you think you should stop?
Yeah,
it's like, where were you hundreds of experiments ago?
Now after, because then, his wife busts in and, it's like, I want to see my husband. And there's the part where they build up like, he's not your husband anymore. And like Doomsday comes walking, up to the glass and still has, remnants of who he is on the inside, So what I think's interesting is they didn't completely finish the experiment. So that's how I kind of took it. So we never got to the part where they've completely made him unkillable. Like they haven't. So you know what I'm saying? Like they never got to where it was like, oh, he's complete. Like we've figured out everything. And what I think is interesting is like they do the resurrection protocol. Like, whoa, what is that? Because is that something? Because like we see like on Superman Lois, like it's triggered inside himself, and on Smallville, like he would die, and then his body would naturally heal and come back from it. So I was like, is there something they're doing that's bringing him back? So
I thought, I thought the same thing. That was, again, not to nitpick, but that was one thing where I was like, why are we having this? Because it's like, is there something unique to this guy Dax where he's able to be resurrected, or can you resurrect people generally? Because that's are you sitting on that? I mean, that seems like a pretty big development.
Maybe, and it's one of those things like they just because it's elitists. So I don't know, maybe because they try to talk like he has his genes, and I'm surprised they didn't clone him. Like and then they could make an army of this if it worked.
It was, I have to say, I did not know about this backstory that Krypton gave him. And it was truly heartbreaking. Again, when the monster and the wife each put their finger up to the glass, it really gets you. And it's, look, again, not to beat up on Smallville, their whole take on Davis Bloom.
It was great until they made Davis the actual,
yes,
a monster just as much as the Doomsday part of him.
Exactly. So you said it perfectly, and I'll leave it at that. So what I liked here was that it maintains the tragedy here, whereas this guy who was just trying to do the right thing and gets turned into this monstrosity. And Doomsday, they use him sparingly throughout the season, but effectively because again, at the beginning part of the season, he's just kind of out there, and there's one point where at the beginning of an episode, like he attacks some ships right out in the ice lands, and like you just see him for a second, but eventually Zod is able to get the drop on him and subdue him and bring him back to Fort Roz. And to your point, they start to use the Black Mercy to enable to make Doomsday susceptible to Zod's commands. There was a funny moment where the scientist, I think, is essentially trying to temper Zod's expectations about what they're trying to do, something to that effect. And Zod is like, we're not trying to get him to make speeches here. Like he just needs to be, which made me laugh. But, we get to the point, and the imagery is so striking when they've utilized this Black Mercy procedure on Doomsday, and he's released from his harness, and Zod gives him the command to kneel, and Doomsday kneels before Zod. It's like, what an image.
Yeah. But it works. Like it doesn't feel like you're cheating. It feels earned. It feels like it's been set up. You're not getting that like, oh, man, like they just had to do that. Like, the kneel, like you guys talked about, the kneel before Zod can be such a tacky line, but they were able to do it so well by doing it sparingly and then making it mean something when he does say it.
Yeah. No, it was, and then, episode 9 is the big episode where Zod sends Doomsday in a ship to Wegthor. And, there's all this business about there's kind of a weird heat signature in the ship, and they're expecting all these troops, and it's just this one monster. And, it's funny. Look, we've talked a lot about what a letdown the end of season 8 of Smallville was, and the fight between Clark and quote unquote fight between Clark and Doomsday. But between Superman and Lois season 3, and now going back and finally watching this business on Krypton, I feel like I'm good. I'm good with what we've gotten,
I mean, Doomsday is brutal, and he goes like just tearing up people. And like they don't pull back. Like he steps on a dude's head and smushes it. You see some body parts lying around. Like he, like they have that scene of like everyone shooting him. All the soldiers are, and they're like, "We got him!" And of course, everyone cheers, and then he just stands up and keeps. And I'm just like, I'm like, run, run.
Yeah, it's so striking. It's so effective. It's like everything that you would want. They make great use of the fact that they're on cable, right? So they can get away with more. It's just as far as showing the reality of what it would be like if you had this unstoppable machine tearing through these poor soldiers. And this leads to what you were alluding to before. We haven't mentioned him yet, and we only mentioned him really briefly in the first episode, but Kim, right? The buddy of Seg, who runs the bar in the first season, and
Seg's best pal.
His best pal, like, and he's one of the rankless former rankless who are conscripted
might
into
even
military service.
Seg's Jimmy Olsen.
I like that. And so, he's initially one of the Sagittari at the start of this, but of course, when the opportunity presents itself, defects and starts working with Val and Adam, and the Adam Chem bromance continues to grow, and you really see Chem's evolution, right? He steps up, right? And he becomes actually an effective commander while also retaining his humanity, which I thought was a really nice touch.
Oh yeah. And of course, you have the part where they're going to detonate bombs and, keep Doomsday and him and Seg, because everybody's going to get off basically on the ship that Doomsday came in. They're going to take it and get out of the, the moon. And Seg's got their detonator, and Seg's going to sacrifice himself and everything, but then Kim, pulls a fast one on him and decides he's going to do it. And it's a really sad scene where, Seg's mad and he's like, "No, don't do this." And he's like, "I have to." And he's, and he's like, "It's not your job," basically. And I will say there's one thing about this show that I would change, that I disagree with, is they brutally killed Kim.
They did. To your point, though, that moment where Kim activates the force field, right, and is able to keep Seg away. I love that moment because Seg is talking about how it's my responsibility. I have to do this. I have to detonate these bombs manually to stop the monster. And Kim is like, no, like it's like this is up to all of us. Like we all have to step up. And that felt very much what Seg was going through. Felt very much like Superman, right? Like he would take this on. He would sacrifice himself. But that there's this Superman within all of us, right? And it's funny. One of our upcoming episodes, and I've already done my homework for it. We'll be looking at the new Krypton arc from the Lois and Clark television series. And at the end of season 3 of that show, Superman goes off to help stop a civil war on New Krypton, and he has this speech to the citizens of Earth as he's leaving the Daily Planet, and he's like, you got to look within yourselves now. Like I won't be here, right? So I don't know. I love that exchange between the two of them, and they reminisce about the hustles they used to pull on the soldiers and everything, and it's heartbreaking. And look, again, keeping me on my toes as you're watching it, you definitely feel like, oh, this really feels like a final moment. But Kem is also a series regular. I didn't know exactly which way this was going to go. I get what you're saying. It was particularly brutal, but there was I thought there was such a beautiful artfulness to the way they depicted his ending, specifically with the sound where, he's in this dark tunnel, right? And you see his reaction, right? Like, he's registering something, and he turns around and there's Doomsday there, and the sound drops out, and it's just the score at this point. And Doomsday just literally punches a hole through Kem and lifts him up, and Kem flips him off, puts up his middle finger, and Doomsday then rips his head off. And as this happens, Kem drops his arm, falls, and he drops the detonator. And for a brief second, I was like, oh my God, are they going to make it that like he wasn't able to press it in time? I was like, that'd be tragic.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they didn't go that route, and it goes off, and all of or I guess enough of the rebels, including our protagonists, are able to get off the moon. But it traps Doomsday, and it sets off this chain reaction that obliterates the entire moon of Wegthor. But yeah, it was brutal. It was I don't know what it was, the decapitation that was too much.
I mean, yeah, like here I punched through him and he's in and just I was just like, man, for such the sweet, good character that's, and then the follow-up scene where Seg's on this like a ship that can supposedly fly through space, and they didn't know he made it out, and he's talking to Val, and Seg's crying, and he's talking about Kim, and he goes, see, I get all choked up just saying it because this is a really great scene where he's like, Kim, House L, son of, or brother to Seg-El. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like, it's not always about blood. Like Val ranked Kim at the end with them and their family.
Yeah. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. No, I'm getting choked up too thinking about it.
I know, like it was so good because, he's like, excuse me, they had said like how Kim was like, a brother to Seg and they're best friends. And, and then in the end, he'll be remembered amongst the house. So,
yeah, I was sad to see him go. I mean, knowing that, I guess I would have felt, had the show continued, and if I knew there were more seasons, I think I would have felt it even more. But it's like I knew we weren't going to spend time with any of these characters after these episodes. But no, I thought that was so effective, so well done. I love that he had that moment. I agree. It was, the decapitation was a bit much, but it also probably what would happen, And it was just like, like, that's the thing. You really, the decapitation, really, I was not expecting to see Kim's head get ripped off, but it was like, okay, like we're really like, this is it. It was tough. And then, I think this kind of brings us to the climax of the season here, where we have this final assault on Zod and this final showdown, right? Really among the three of them, this family unit of Seg and Lyta and Zod here. And we get, I know I'm jumping around and skipping ahead a little bit, but we get this, and look, we've talked about these callbacks and these little things like that, but they always feel earned. This one maybe was pushing it a little bit, but it was so cool and badass that I had to let it go. It was so good, where Seg takes a few steps outside the palace and says, "General, would you care to step outside?" Oh, it was perfect.
But as much as it still worked without feeling too forced.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, because it was like, he said it in just enough of a different way. Like, I'll allow it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'll allow it. I'm good. Like, you can argue, oh, it's too, nah. It didn't seem as forced as like some of the reference that Smallville tries to put in there. Like it felt natural. I'll take it.
And again, this goes back to what I was saying before, that yes, that's the moment that leads to the physical confrontation where they fight, right? For Seg and Zod, and then Lyta gets in on the battle and all of that. And of course they're ultimately able to subdue Zod. But before that, I feel like the ultimate the true victory comes before that, when Seg is able to get through to the people, right? And they have this moment out there. And that's where, as I was saying before, one of these soldiers who's been part of the inner circle here and saw Zod enact his brutality on those who came before him, actually turns and refuses to follow Zod's orders. So as much as, yes, this does then ultimately come down to this fist fight, right, on the steps outside. But before that, there was this turn where people saw Zod's true colors. And I like that. I'm glad that they had that moment.
I was watching it and I looked at my kid and I was like, because Solomon was popping in and out and Sayla was just sitting there. She was playing on the iPad next to me, not paying attention. And I was watching this. I was like, is this child abuse? Just like to myself, I'm like, it's a dad beating on his son. Sure, the son's older and well trained and bigger, but you know, like, what would you classify this?
Yeah, it's and also going back. I know I said this before, right? This idea that they really kind of let go of the whole time travel aspect because when Lyta was seemingly killed, no one talked about the potential ramification for Zod coming into existence. No one. And it makes sense that Zod wasn't talking about it because Zod knew that his mother was still alive, albeit in this state under the Black Mercy. But like, it just never came up, which in fairness, there was so much going on and it was so genuinely compelling that I don't think they needed the crutch of, hey, this is all to save Superman in the future. But at the same time, we do have these time travelers. We do have these aspects at play. So I don't know. Maybe I would have liked at least a little bit more of a recognition of what the larger picture is. But again, it was so compelling as it was that I don't want to nitpick on that.
I mean, they could have cleared it all up, in a third season. You know what I'm saying? With time travel, it depends on how you establish your rules. Then it did seem like they were playing by Back to the Future rules more so than MCU time travel rules. So, the Flash, we're going to keep it DC, So, I mean, it's very possible at the end that Adam Strange could have done something and just took Drew back to the beginning, kind of like he'll remember Seg and Val on this journey, but you'll never remember what's happened here. And and he went back and whatever, kind of, restored Krypton before, and we actually see it play out like it's supposed to. I don't know, something like you could have done like that, where they got to a point where the only way to save was to go back and, let everything unfold naturally. But we never got that. I mean, and speaking of Adam, like he got paralyzed and Val made him robot legs basically so he could walk, which kind of helps form the Adam Strange look suit. He gets a jetpack. So I was like, all he's missing is his pistols, and stuff. So that was like one thing throughout the whole thing. I'm like, where's Adam's costume?
I know, he's just in a hoodie and jeans.
I'm like, this ain't Smallville.
I know. I was glad that they got him to that point. The last thing with the fight that I really appreciated was, I don't know if Zod says something to Seg along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing broadly, but like, you're nobody essentially, right? And Seg says, it's like, yeah, like I'm nobody important, nobody special, but I'm going to take you down. And again, I don't have the exact quote top of mind, but I like the spirit of that exchange between them because it's like, yeah, when we think of the legend of Superman and the Kryptonian lore, again, if anything, we think of JOR-EL, right? But this idea that there was this other key figure here who played this pivotal role and stepped up when the time came, I really appreciated it. So I loved, as much as, again, we had some big stuff. We had this beautifully realized Phantom Zone. We had more with Brainiac. We had Doomsday. I mean, like, there was so much big stuff, but I did love that it ultimately did come down to this fist fight between the two of them, between father and son. It felt right.
It did. Almost like a prince challenging a king, and if we're going to get biblical, for example, there's ramifications and similarities in there.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's funny. The finale begins with Zod on the precipice of conquest, right? Leading his fleet. And, the whole time in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, is this not going to end well? Again, it's so, in retrospect, it's so obvious, but at the time it wasn't dawning on me. But ultimately, the last we see of Zod at the end of this season, he now is being subjected to the Black Mercy and living out his fantasy, but out of commission. And then,
I mean, it's a callback to the end for the man who has everything.
Yes, with Mongol, for sure.
Where they put it, exactly. That's, where, especially like the animated series where Mongol's happy living on a planet where he's conquering, and, you have Superman, Diana, and Bruce talking about what do you think he's seeing. And that's kind of like how you homage something without being blatant about it.
Yeah. And we do get, again, this return appearance from Lobo, and he and Seg are going to team up because Lobo's whole thing is he wants to kill Brainiac, right? And their objectives are aligned because Brainiac has JOR-EL, so they're going to team up. It's, the team up that now we never get to see. I will say this, and then again, we end with the ship approaching Earth with Brainiac and JOR-EL. Going into this, I did think, and I was afraid that this was going to end on more of a cliffhanger, like a true cliffhanger where, again, we're in the middle of battle or something and you don't know who lives and who dies. clearly there's plenty that was unresolved, but I felt like there was, I mean, I'm so disappointed that we didn't get to see more, and I would still love to see this get resolved in some way, shape, or form. And we'll get to that in a second. I want to toss it to you, but at the same time, they put enough of a button on the storylines that we had been following, and it was more just, okay, we had set up for the next season that we didn't get to see. But I at least felt like, again, in terms of this battle between the rebels and Zod and all that, like I felt like we got a conclusion there. So I felt good about that at least.
Yeah.
You know, I had said before about how this was, you know, truly, I think one of the best love triangles we've had. I know we really haven't talked about it much during the episode, but compelling cases I feel to be made from both Nyssa and Lyta. And the heartbreaking thing, I thought this was such a great scene and a great line and a great delivery where, you know, Nyssa has this moment with Seg where she's like, oh, Lyta's the love of your life, right? He's like, you know, yeah. And he's like, and I'm afraid that you're mine, like you're the love of my life, right? But she knows that she's not that for him. Oh, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking. And, you know, Seg's a good guy. And it's caught at one of those interesting places. And it kind of like makes me think like if season 3, like Nyssa's caught in her own stuff because she was originally going to find JOR-EL. Now Seg's going to try to find JOR-EL. Like maybe that's where him and Lyta created Drew in this time period. You know what I'm saying? Because Drew and JOR-EL aren't that different in age.
Right.
But let me lay out my pitch for you here.
Go for it.
I told you this. I said this would not be that difficult to do. Is whenever Superman and Lois comes back, we have Clark in this kind of coma or whatever you open up, where it's one of those like that we've seen in other films and TV shows, like the place in between place, the heaven, the spirit world, whatever. And it's like Clark and he sees JOR-EL and JOR-EL's talking to him, but then Seg-El walks in, his grandfather, and it's Cameron Cuff, you know, put a beard on him and stuff. And it would also give the impression that maybe Seg died younger than what we think, you know? And it talks about like family and lineage and, you know, it's not your time, son, all that. And go, my grandson, it's proud. I'm proud to finally see you and, you know, meet you, but it's not time. Something like that, because that would call back to Krypton was all about like your grandson, the greatest hero ever. And then you have this moment where Seg gets to meet his grandson, but it's like, no, it's your time. It's not your time. It would just be so easy to do. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not a lot of like special effects because you can paint the, you know, the white. I think about like the scene in Harry Potter where he sees Dumbledore and it's just the train station in white, really bright because that's what Harry envisions, you know. And we go back to Supernatural when they go to heaven and they're thinking of like the rose gardens and stuff. So it wouldn't be that difficult to do. And it would be a nice nod that there's a way because we've never gotten Zod on Superman and Lois. Okay. We got Zod on Supergirl, but that's a different Earth. So we've never got Zod on Superman and Lois. We've seen older JOR-EL, but we've never seen anyone that appears on Superman and Lois and on Krypton. They've never interacted. And since, you know, Doomsday on Superman and Lois is Bizarro style Doomsday, the other Doomsday still works too.
Yep.
You know, of having existed. So it would be a nice nod of, hey, this is the prequel to this show, even though you didn't know it. And it brings it back around because I love Superman and Lois so much. And I love Krypton so much. And it'd be like a nice, like these two shows are more connected than you thought. Because also, and I've said this before, that one of the things I still hold out for this last season is in a latter episode of season 1, they're selling Superman merch. And if you look at that table, there is a red cape in the back with the yellow S on it for sale. And that's the cape that we see in Krypton. So I've been hoping, you know, we didn't get it last season. We got a new suit, but maybe when season 4 comes back, you know, they put that S on the back of the cape, and that would kind of seal it like even more for me. Like, boom.
I would love to see a bridge between those two shows for all the reasons you just laid out and that we talked about last time, and the fact that They have each occupied their own space. They haven't overlapped, right? To the extent that you can kind of merge them together and you're not contradicting anything. And I feel like for people who are watching Superman and Lois who have never seen Krypton, that's okay. It's like you're introducing a new member of the family and you're getting a little bit of backstory, and it wouldn't take anyone out of it. But for those of us who did watch Krypton and were left on this cliffhanger, right, of how does he get, not does he get JOR-EL back? We figure he will, but how? What happens? I think that would be beautiful. And I think kind of the way in my ideal scenario, I love your pitch, right? Where, maybe Clark is kind of in between realms after fighting Doomsday or while fighting Doomsday. And he has this encounter with Seg. And I think kind of the message could be like, I was once asked to essentially stand aside and let my home be destroyed in time, all for an idea, the idea of this hero that my grandson would one day be. And now that I see you, I know that sacrifice was worth it, that you've become the ultimate hero.
The dialogue.
That's it. I mean, like that, it would be amazing.
I'm in tears now. I'm in tears now.
I would love to see something like that. If anyone is listening, please.
Please, you don't have to pay us. Just maybe have a character named, we'll take Anthony Tyler. Okay. That's a good character name. Tyler Desiato. That works too. Whatever. You just put a character or some sort of name drop in there. Or, that's all we're asking. That's it.
Look, this show gave us this whole grandfather, grandson angle that I never knew I needed in my Superman story. It gave us hands down the best Brainiac on screen that we've gotten. Truly top tier depictions of Zod and Doomsday. And a truly compelling backstory to what happened on this planet. So much so that even when you take away the time travel aspects, and look, if you watch season 2 in a vacuum, you really would barely even know that this has that aspect to it, really. Mm-hmm. And it still works. And it's such a bummer to me that we didn't get that third season. I've mentioned a bunch of times now that proposal, and I think we've hit on most of the main points, or at least what really stood out to me. There was one other, and I think you'll appreciate this. Part of the proposal for season 3 was that Val was going to work to reach the man inside Doomsday to try to bring forth Dax again and try to redeem the man within the monster. So I don't know how successful he would have been. Probably not very, but I think that could have been an interesting angle to explore.
It would have been interesting if you really would have played into the tragedy where Val's pulling Dax out, but then something happened that the last experiment is basically killing Dax and then completely making it a mindless killing machine. And then something happens and he gets just ejected into space because they didn't know what to do with it. And then how it finds its way to Earth. Like, I think that would have been just kind of playing into the like you said, the tragedy of Doomsday and the idea of you can think that this is the only Doomsday and this is eventually the one that Superman does fight. And by the way, that we know that Adam talks about there's only one person that's ever fought Doomsday and he doesn't exist anymore right now. So we know that that's happened.
Yeah. Is there anything about this season or Krypton generally we didn't talk about that you wanted to before we sign off?
I mean, there's little things that I know we've missed, little beats, but there's so much to a 10-episode season. And it's such a good, compelling show of one that we didn't know we wanted, that we got, that we should have. And I say we as a fan collective. And I think it did make it difficult that it was on Syfy on cable because we live in such like, at the time we had DC Universe, we had these streamers and we had the CW, but then to put this kind of on, cable, I think it hurt it. It really did. And, I I had hoped that it would have it'd be like Syfy's new big project, much like Battlestar Galactica was, and we would see more of a return and continuation of the series. So it was very disappointing when it was canceled because they did set it up in a way that they could be, they could touch the DC world without feeling like you're too close and you're shrinking it. Like, I mean, in theory, you could have introduced a Green Lantern at some point. If Lobo and they're traveling to get to Earth, you're going to have the Thanagarians and the Ranians. You could have had Green Lantern either way. Like, you could have had a Green Lantern character show up trying to stop the war. So there's so much, you still could have mined without feeling like you're stepping on the toes of what we know is to come.
And Zod even says like chart a course for Sector 2814. So they're within that paradigm. No, I agree. Look, I don't know what else to say other than I love this. I'm kicking myself for not watching it sooner. I'm so glad I watched it now. I had so much fun talking to you this week and talking to Zach last week. You know, audience, if someone named Seg-El pops up on the 4th and final season of Superman and Lois, I know at least 2 people are going to be jumping for joy.
I will literally stand up and scream in elation, and my wife will catch it, but then my kids are like, "Daddy, what?" And I'll have to explain to them, but that'll be good.
If it happens, then I will really be convinced that someone out there is listening to this.
Every episode of our podcast, I'm like, if you're still listening, just message me directly. I have more ideas that I spit out every episode.
Yeah. Well, I know I always admire your creativity in thinking about this kind of stuff. It's not necessarily where I gravitate, but this is one instance where I did. And I feel like it's such a prime opportunity. So again, I doubt it'll happen, but I would love for it to, and it would be absolutely tremendous. But Krypton, I'm really grateful for this series. And I'm glad that I've closed this gap in my fandom. And I'm glad, my interest now in the Krypton side of the story is higher than it ever has been, really, because of this show. So this has been such a blast.
Because, one thing I don't want Superman Legacy is Krypton. I would rather they'd hold off that like a sequel. Because I think sometimes you can bog down the story with the planet, but this really made the planet feel alive and like it was people. Because and it made me more interested because, I recently read the Krypton books, part of the John Byrne run. We talked about how I didn't like it. I'll sum it up there. Go listen to Electric Mullet. But this made me more interested in the culture and what the planet was. And I could see where it would have been very interesting if we would have continued and we would have had, let's not forget that Seg has another son, that would have been interested for him and Nyssa to have. And so that could have been a subplot where we meet baby Zor, I'm just saying like there's more to come.
I forgot all about him. That's true.
Because it really touches on why Supergirl, like, that was about her, like having grown up in Krypton and everything. So it makes you feel more of like her story. Cause now we kind of get an idea of who these people were.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I thank you so much for rewatching and coming along and having this discussion.
I loved it.
I'm so glad.
It's been on the to-do list, but we've gotten so much new content that there hasn't been time to revisit a lot of old, but now we've kind of slowed down. So it was nice to kind of revisit stuff that I've wanted to go back and check out. So
nice.
It's a perfect opportunity.
And I know I was messaging with Zach a little while ago, and he was about to start his rewatch of season 2. So, he rewatched season 1 for the episode that we did, and then he was so into it, he wanted to keep going. So that's great. And I hope for if this inspires anyone to watch or rewatch, and especially to watch for anyone who hadn't experienced the show before, if we can prompt anyone to, that would be great. And I hope people enjoy it. And, please reach out and let us know what you think. I encourage everyone to check out your podcast, The KRYPTON Report, available on all major podcast platforms. You can watch on YouTube. You can follow along on social media. Is there anything in particular you want to plug or anywhere else you want to direct them?
No, I'm just, I'm always active on, I still call it Twitter. I don't care. I'm always active there. That's just kind of my default social media app, but you can find us anywhere. It's always fun to interact with people and have discussions about their thoughts. So I welcome it.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, audience. Doomed Planet will continue next week. I'll be joined by returning guest Rich Roney for a discussion of the Bottle City of Kandor. We'll be looking at and discussing a selection of pre-crisis stories. I've already recorded it. It's a lot of fun. I'm excited for people to hear that. So keep tuning in. Thank you as always. And of course, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.